how have you maintained this sort of effectiveness running your own business with everything that comes with that?
17 gloriously happy years as a one-to-one coach, coaching leaders from a massive range of organisations. If I sensed that my drive was higher than somebody else's, then I would fall into the mistake of thinking that I needed to sort of impose my enthusiasm and my drive on them by...
What experiences, particularly from your childhood, shaped your leadership style? Let's hear a bit about that.
My mum's a primary school teacher, and I loved stories and books as a child. So the result of those two things meant I could read and write before I started school.
Hello and welcome to Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. In each episode of the show, we hear the insightful confessions of a successful leader who wants to inspire others to live their professional and personal dreams. I am always keen to hear your feedback, particularly in relation to the kinds of leaders you would like me to invite onto the show in future. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rich insights from our special guest.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. I am joined in the studio today by Kate Franklin. I'm delighted that she's here with us. Kate spent 25 years developing leaders in large organizations. Then in 2020, she co-founded a new company called Nkusi Change. Nkusi Change has developed a powerful formula for fast and lasting culture change, one team at a time. Kate, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Lovely. Well, we always start this show by finding out a little bit more about our guests. So tell us about yourself and where your current focus is, please, Kate.
So I had the first chapter of my career was in financial services, where I had a wonderful time in a variety of HR and organisational change type of roles, eventually leading into leadership development, which was wonderful. And then I probably would never have left the company I was with most recently because it was just such a joy to work there, were it not for the opportunity to move to the USA, because my husband is an American citizen and he got a 2-year placement in Washington, DC, the terms of which were way too good to say no to. So I leapt for that opportunity without having much of a plan. And actually that transition was super challenging, but the brilliant thing that came out of it was as a way of creating new connections and finding my feet in a brand new city, I signed up for the Coaches Training Institute, which is one of the world's first coach training schools. And within days of beginning that process, I had decided that I'm supposed to be a one-to-one coach. That was in 2005, and I haven't looked back. I had 17 gloriously happy years as a one-to-one coach, coaching leaders from a massive range of organisations, from Magic Circle law firms and big financial services companies, working very globally, through to third sector organisations like Save the Children and Comic Relief, where I did some of the most eye-opening work with humanitarian aid workers and teams working in really challenging conditions. So kind of stretched me in a whole new set of ways. But then, and when I started in my coaching journey, I didn't have a clear idea of what kind of coach I was going to be and what was my niche. And it decided for me. People came to me without me ever really setting out my stall. That it seems the part of my purpose on the planet is to help people who are either recovering from burnout or at risk of burnout, and they've realized that they need to make some quite radical changes to the way they engage with their work. And I suspect the reason that came to me was because I myself, during my corporate years, was a pretty dangerous workaholic. I think I was very lucky that I was always surrounded by pretty reasonable people, and I worked in environments that weren't that extreme. But I always say, if I had been during my 20s in some of the more extreme environments like Magic Circle law firms or consulting houses, I probably would have been one of those 28-year-olds who has a heart attack at her desk because she's not gone home for 3 days and she's been working nonstop, because I would always take myself to the absolute edge of my limits and in a very unhealthy way. So yeah, I believe that as the brilliant coach Abu Dishabi says, we coach from our wounds, right? We bring to the table our own flaws and wounds and difficult experiences, and that makes us who we are. And without me deliberately setting out to do it, those were the clients who found me, and I love that work. I find it enormously enriching and satisfying. There were two things missing for me, though, in those 17 years of one-to-one coaching, two sources of frustration, which led me to where I am now. One was the fact that whilst it is deeply rewarding coaching work, both in terms of the personal satisfaction and the financial rewards, it never sat completely comfortably with me that it was such an elite sport, that especially in the private sector, the fees I could command and the fees that generally coaching commands make it inaccessible to ordinary folk. And I was only ever working with C-suite. Even when I went to do pro bono or low bono for the charity sector, they were still linking me up with their C-suite leaders, many of whom went to much better universities and schools than I did. And I always felt like this doesn't feel quite right in terms of my values. I should be, but based on what I've come from and who I am, surely my role here is to be more accessible and to get to the people who, in my view, are the ones who actually create organizational culture and create customer experience. And that's the junior leaders, the first line team leaders, who are so frequently under-supported, underdeveloped, underloved, and blamed when everything goes wrong. They're the ones who need the coaching, much less so than the most senior people. So that was one source of dissatisfaction, the elitism of coaching. The other source of dissatisfaction for me was the fact that I would so often start to spot that the challenges that my coachees were up against had roots in the system around them. There were systemic problems in the organization. And I was always fascinated by that. I could spot it easily. My background in organizations meant that I felt I could quite rapidly grow insight and have something to offer the organization and wanted to help it. But coaching is absolutely sacred in its principle of confidentiality. So I could see all these things were going on, but mostly was completely unable to do anything with that insight, because it goes against the grain of what you're there for. You're there to serve the individual and not to help the organization to change. So I dabbled with systems coaching, and I learned about how to work with teams, but still none of that really helped me get past the barrier of, I can see all these things that are going on in the background of my coachee's work world, and I can't do much about them. So in the year 2000, I started having a very different kind of conversation with a wonderful woman, Elise, who had been one of my favorite ever coaching clients for the past few years. We met when she was chief marketing officer at Thomson Reuters, and she was leading very demanding change programs. And she became my coaching client for a couple of years. And then we became friends after she transitioned out of corporate life and retrained as a coach. And then by the end of 2019, we'd started to have a conversation along the lines of, how could we work together? Because we've got so much passion in common. We really share excitement for transformational change and people-centered leadership, and could see the gaps in big organizations in terms of what's needed to make change work and to make cultures more positive. And we said, what if we could design an organization which doesn't just bring the magic of coaching to more individuals, So making it more accessible through economies of scale and other clever ways of making the price point different so that middle leaders can get to it too, but also drives systemic improvement. So we've designed a method for driving systemic change for whole teams or whole business units at a time via coaching programs which support the individual, meet everyone individually where they are, but within a program of change that's designed to support the organization to grow and develop. So that's my focus right now, and it is the high point. I've just turned 50, and I never thought that at this age I would be in the high point of my career. This is my most fun chapter so far, which is a great thing to be able to say.
Absolutely. And apparently 50 is the new 40 and you're in your prime. So obviously that's a much needed service in terms of what you're providing.
I'm totally there.
Well, thank you for that context. And also what our audience likes to know is, away from the passion, away from the meaning, away from what you're in service of, which we can hear about, what about you in terms of your personal life? When you're away from work, what is it you love doing?
So I'm very blessed that I have been in many very happy relationships since my school days. Most of my closest friends are people I've been closest friends with since I was 15, 16, and that includes my husband. We've been together since we were 15 years old. He was one of the crowd that my teachers used to tell my parents was a bad influence and they should keep me away from. And it turned out they weren't right about that, Andrea Ferris, if you're listening. Because I do believe that, a happy prime relationship at home, where, whether it's a marriage or a life partnership or whatever it is for you, I do believe that is such a powerful source of energy and fuel for everything else we do, right? And I'm just so deeply grateful for that relationship. I wasn't sure whether we'd be able to sustain it in our 30s, because he spent our 20s telling me he wasn't interested in having kids, and I always knew I wanted to have a family. So I think that partly is what fueled my workaholism in my 20s, because I thought that I was going to potentially be parenting alone, because I was so determined. I thought, well, I might have to leave him and do it on my own. But happily, he came round in the end. So by the time we were 34, we had our first daughter, who's now 16. And then we were blessed to have a second very healthy, very wonderful daughter 3 years after that. She's now 12. Parenting, of course, is way harder and more of a roller coaster than anyone ever admits to you, but it's also a great source of joy and fulfillment and endless learning. Learning is a big value of mine, so I'm happy to be on that learning roller coaster. I've got a lot of friends and family around me, and where I've spent most of my life, where I've grown up, and very deep part of my identity is Southeast London. So I grew up in Greenwich and now live in the borough of Lewisham. And I'm involved in as much as I can in the community around me, and helping, especially with social change and social justice efforts in the wonderful community I live in. I've been a school governor for years. I'm not doing that now, but I love taking part in important community activities and feeling connected to the world around me. And I love nature, and I'm about to disappear off to a spa in Switzerland tomorrow morning. So I'm feeling very happy about that, when I'm going with a girlfriend to a wonderful place I've been to before. So, very blessed, and got lots of sources of joy that keep me fueled for the hard work of growing a new young business.
Lovely. And you've referenced there, obviously, your teenage daughters, and also the fact that you met your husband to be when you were at school as well. So let's go back to those times now, and what experiences, particularly from your childhood, shaped your leadership style? Let's hear a bit about that.
I love this question, and I'd never thought about it much until you put it to me. But I've been thinking about it, and building on this conversation we had initially over these weeks with endless kind of aha moments. Really, it's just such a fascinating field of work that you're engaged in. So there are two main things I think that stand out from a very happy childhood overall. One is we have identified at Nkusi Change that one of the main barriers to success in the workplace in large organisations right now, in terms of personal growth barriers, by far and away the biggest one is confidence. We've tracked over 3,000 coaching sessions. We track what topics come up in every single one. And I could show you the data. It's mind-blowing how much more important confidence is than any of the other 14 topics that we track. And I've always been interested in supporting people to grow their confidence, and it's been a fascinating area for me professionally. But it's only recently occurred to me that my natural confidence has been such an important part of how I show up at work and as a leader, and what a privilege it is. I never thought of it as a source of privilege until quite recently, but now I think, I was so blooming lucky to have that early experience in childhood, a series of early experiences which have given me this real deep confidence in my own brain and what I have to offer at work. And I think I can track that back to my very first year of education when I was only 4 or 5, because I can remember my mum's a primary school teacher and I loved stories and books as a child. So the result of those two things meant I could read and write before I started school. And I can remember knowing that, and knowing that that made me different from the children around me when I was in that first year of school. And my mum used to say to me, well, if you know what the teachers are talking about already and don't get bored, get helpful. So she taught me that it was my job to help the other children. Yeah. So I grew up spending my whole life through primary and secondary school always helping other kids. And I now see, what an amazing source of confidence that was, but also how it meant when I was in my 20s and I went into HR, I never stopped and thought, have I got the right to be here advising these people who are 20, 30 years older than me and who know much more about this work environment than I do? What right have I got to be telling them anything about how to manage people? Never occurred to me. I never had that experience that a lot of women have when you walk into a room full of men and think, should I be here? Do I have the right to be here? Am I as good as them? Am I as clever as them? Never for a second thought I wasn't as clever as anybody else. Not even in the most cerebral, incredible environments. I would have known I wasn't as good at maths as a lot of them in financial services, but that was never what I was there to talk about, so that wasn't a problem. And I knew I was as sharp and fast as they were, and I guess because I had that baseline confidence, it became true. I suspect if you tested my IQ compared to theirs, it probably wouldn't have been true, but I never needed to. And because I felt so confident, I found I was received really positively, right? It becomes a virtuous cycle. So I just think that's extraordinary. And I'm so blooming grateful for that positive grounding that came from always feeling like I was capable. Yeah. So there's that was the big positive. Where I thought I was going to start in the answer of this question was where the conversation that you and I first had about what fueled my workaholism, what fueled my tendency to overwork and to be very hard on myself about how good something had to be before it was ready. Perfectionism. Yeah. And I think where that comes from is that both my parents have incredibly high standards about accuracy and spelling and grammar. And so whenever I ever presented them with a piece of work that I'd done, they would always correct the spelling and grammar before they would step back and talk generally about what they liked about it. I think that's a wonderful thing, right? It's another privilege is to know spelling and grammar like I do, and it's meant I can hold my own in lots of environments where, you know, I can see people who don't have confidence with grammar get held back. But that kind of perfectionism and that detail orientation that they have, which is very different to the way I take in information. I'm much more a big picture, sweeping generalizations kind of person, meant I've often felt like I was failing, like, you know, the when I was presenting them with any piece of work, they would always be able to spot the problems or spot the inaccuracies before they could comment on the wider thing. And I realize now they were just incredibly proud of me and just always wanting to stretch me and take me to the next level. But I think it created a kind of pattern in my head where I would naturally assume that my first or second attempt wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
And then layered on top of that, my dad is incredibly particular. So I think generally was a very effective, high functioning parent, but he himself had very anxious parents. They were both quite damaged in different ways by World War II. And they would be very, very uptight. He was the only child and everything was highly controlled in their world. They couldn't cope with anything going wrong or accidents or mistakes. So my sister and I laugh now about the fact that when we were kids, he used to insist that we unwrapped a Cadbury's cream egg, but keeping the foil wrapper intact in one perfect piece.
Wow.
And that it's a source of amusement now, right? We tease him about it all the time, but that level of order was it was very much my family. My family of origin is all about everything being perfectly controlled and neat and tidy. And that not just that is their preference, because I think to have that as a preference is a perfectly healthy thing, but actually that is the only way to be. That's the correct way. So lateness or any kind of mistakes or inaccuracy or sloppiness is all quite harshly judged. and I'm someone who is much more free flowing. I am still on the spectrum of spontaneous to orderly. I'm still pretty far over on the orderly side, but compared to them, I'm much more spontaneous and free flowing and less organized and definitely much less precise. So I have to work when I'm with them, just like I've always had to work when I'm trying to influence in financial services, because I'm surrounded by people who are very detailed and very accurate. I have to be very careful with my language because I know that I lose them if I make a sweeping statement or an exaggeration. Because I say to my mum, it's freezing, and she says, well, no, it's not. It's 2 degrees. And or I'm starving. Well, you're not starving, are you? And so you have to be really, really precise. And that I find it doesn't come naturally to the way that my brain works. So it's quite an effort to be like that. And whilst it prepared me brilliantly for working with very accurate attention to detail people, it did. I think it gave me a sense that things had to be much more perfect than they actually do need to be.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you may go on to talk about this now in terms of obviously that tendency to overwork, but when did you notice that maybe some of that kind of system that you'd grown up around and not know anything else started to impact your leadership style? Because what I find with a lot of successful leaders, a lot of what informs them from their childhood and early years enables them to be successful because they're driven, they're really focused, they are achievement orientated, all these things. And then at some point it catches up with them. Not all of them, but sometimes. So what about your story in relation to that?
Yeah, I think, well, through my 20s, I believed that in order to have a fulfilling and exciting career, you just had to sacrifice everything. I thought that it was just normal to have to, to sacrifice your health and your fitness and your well-being and relationships with friends, because you just had to, work hard. And I think that Protestant work ethic, I call it, was very deep in my family. My grandparents were all manual workers, but they all had this, view that you should be. It was the good people, decent people would be up at 6 a.m. and grafting, and that he would. I remember my granddad standing at his window criticizing builders on the other side of the world, saying on the other side of the road that he could see, saying, well, they didn't start until 9:30. Could have done half a day's work by then. And so that kind of belief that you only get good outcomes if you graft was really built in, and that is super healthy. And I share the value of hard work, but what I had to learn the hard way is that there's a tipping point where hard work becomes counterproductive. And it really took me until I was in my early 30s when I had my first coach to realize that there was another way, and that I didn't have to make those kind of awful sacrifices. And furthermore, that I would get better outcomes if I didn't. If I took time to exercise and to have lovely, relaxing evenings, which would mean I'd get better sleep, I would do better at work. And I would never have believed that. I think if many people tried to tell me when I was in my 20s, and I just didn't believe them. But then I think I had to get to a certain point of misery with overwork before I could even countenance that there might be a different way of operating.
It's interesting. I was working with a client this week, and I don't know if you can relate to this or not, but it'd be good to get your view about what happened with you. He had a similar view, and he's in a leadership position now where he knows to actually be really good at what he does, moving into a chief executive position, he has to step back more and do less and be more present in his relationships and his stakeholder relationships. And his words were, but it feels like cheating, because everyone else is working really hard and I'm stepping back to create space. I'm worried about how that might look. It's really interesting in terms of that kind of dynamic. So what about for you, relating to what you've just said, what was that point where you recognized you needed to maybe modify how you were leading, how you were changing your mindset to enable you to live a more, not balanced life, but a life that was a better, a more healthier for you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was always surrounded by wise, balanced people, which is probably the thing that saved me, right? So the point that I started joining the dots between, my unbalanced behaviors and wanting to change and seeing that I could become better at my work if I worked less, there was no resistance around me to that. And in fact, I think I knew, because other people around me weren't working excessive hours and I saw that as more evidence of me needing to, I needed to drive harder to achieve decent results. But I for years, it was like a guilty secret that I was working excessive hours. So I would spend an evening writing emails, but save them all in my draft folder so nobody knew what time I'd actually written them, and then send them in the morning. So I know I was in lots of weird little guilty secret habits around overwork. So I don't, because overall the environment was one that did not value overwork. So I think it was therefore the conditions were relatively easy for me to make the change, because people, no, it wasn't an environment that prized excessive working hours. And I knew enough about leadership. Growing up in HR means you're a very good grounding before you become a people manager. You have a very good grounding in all of the theory, and you know that you can create so much damage as a leader if you let people see that you're working excessive hours. Yeah. So for that reason, I was quite clever not to ever expect that of anybody else. And I was certainly never someone who was sending emails at midnight and expecting a response. That just was not the style of the organization I worked in at all. So I was so lucky with that, because God knows what I would have done to myself if I had been in those organizations. But I still think I probably cast a shadow as a leader with some of the things around the perfectionism, and especially in my very early leadership roles. I would, if I sensed that my drive was higher than somebody else's, then I would fall into the mistake of thinking that I needed to sort of impose my enthusiasm and my drive on them by kind of getting more involved in the detail of what they were doing, giving more direction in how they should be doing things. And of course, that is the most counterproductive, most damaging, micromanaging style that you could possibly employ. Fortunately, I was lucky enough to have great relationships with people. And I guess I'm quite good at reading people, so I could see, I would try that out and see how ineffective it was, and I'd rapidly back off. But I'm sure I caused all kinds of damage in those early years because I was so relentless and so overly focused on trying to get things perfect and it all having to be just so, that's never a healthy frame.
No. And it's really interesting. You're a great example of someone, who experienced coaching and it helped you, and then you went into coaching and you've seen how it benefits others. And I love people when they're on their personal development journey. So particularly you set up your own business. It's a very different environment when we do that. I did it as well in 2017. How have you maintained this sort of effectiveness running your own business with everything that comes with that, and keeping the sort of naysayers away and removing the self-doubt and keeping that negativity away from yourself? How have you managed to keep that positivity day to day?
Well, I'd love to say it's all easy now. I've mastered it. I don't need to think about it anymore, but that would be a big fat lie. What I've learned about the way we manage ourselves and our demons is, well, certainly for me and the vast majority of people the hundreds of people I've coached, is you never get to a point where you go, right, I'm complete. The work is done. I'm perfect now. It's a constant learning, constant adjustment. And I think what I can aim for with the amount I've invested in my self-development is that I can recover faster. Yeah. When I go into my default modes of, going too fast, trying too hard, being a bit over perfect, I have the awareness to recognize that I'm in it and to change my behavior and to recover more quickly. I'm still fundamentally the same person that I was 20 years ago. I'm just a little bit more self-aware and a little bit better at recovering from myself. Yeah. And the way I achieve that, and that works so powerfully for me, is through continued coaching. So I've got a series of brilliant coaches and I go to them for different things, different moments, but to have that ability to just, hear myself and have somebody reflect back to me what I'm doing and just gently help me to course correct is just incredibly powerful and such a gift. I love the idea of self-coaching, but I can't. I've tried it and I've tried lots of ways of managing myself, and I can do a lot on my own, but it's much faster and much more efficient for me if I'm working with somebody else. I wouldn't love long-term solitude for that. I would be very dangerous to myself on a desert island.
Well, you're soon going to have your own AI buddy to help you with your self-coaching, but we'll talk about that on another podcast. So going into the next question, lots of people out there listening to this, watching this, really relating to your story about where they've come from, where they are right now, and listening to your story. So for those people that are interested and want to hear your words, what advice would you give to those leaders out there in terms of how they can channel their early experiences into sustainable leadership?
Yeah, and I do think there are so many people stuck in the rut of overwhelm and overwork, and it is so the first thing to notice, I would say, and awareness is a huge part of the battle. The first thing to notice is it is a cycle, and it was a cycle I was stuck in for 10 years, so I know it so well, and there's absolutely no judgment from me that we tend to assume when we see that we've taken on too much or the expectations around us are unrealistic, we tend to go into a default response to that, which is to just go faster.
Yeah.
and go in a slightly panicked way of hoping that if I just move fast enough and if I multitask enough, then maybe by magic it will all happen. And sometimes in some short bursts, that is an effective strategy. But unfortunately for most of us, it creates frazzle and leads to weaker decision making and weaker ability to plan and diminished quality of rest. So it quickly becomes quite a vicious cycle where, we may be working longer hours, but we're exhausted. So what the hell are we doing in those hours? And it's not the stuff that is fueling a more productive, more creative day tomorrow. So I think just noticing that you're in that pattern and trying not to judge yourself for it, because then the typical tendency is to then beat ourselves up. So it always makes me laugh how I see people will use self-care or lack of as yet another tool to beat themselves with. I've signed up for the Calm app and I'm never using it, and I've signed up for the gym and I don't go, and I'm supposed to go to yoga and I'm always too tired, and it's so trying to get out of the habit of all of that self-judgment is really, really important for unlocking change. And then a really important piece of this is, most of us, especially if we're big picture thinkers with a lot of drive and ambition, which many stressed out people are, we tend to think that the solution comes in huge, gigantic lifestyle change. So, I mean, if I had £1 for everyone I've ever heard sharing their daydream with me, which is about jacking in the city life and buying a coffee shop on a beach or anyone's equivalent of that, if it seems to me like every stressed out, furrowed brow in the city has got this daydream behind it about jacking it all in and running away to the beach or the countryside. And people tend to think, like, if I want to make a big change, it has to be that huge. Mm-hmm. So someone who wants to work on their fitness will talk about signing up for a marathon, or we tend to go for these huge, all-encompassing goals. And not surprisingly, that's incredibly overwhelming and hard in itself. And the big learning I have from working on this myself and from seeing others make the transition from stress head to calm is one tiny little micro choice at a time. Our day is defined by the little choices that we make during the course of the day. Do I stop for a lunch break, or do I force myself to power through even though I'm really tired? Do I take a walk after my lunch? Do I accept this not particularly critical meeting that's just come in for 5:00, even though I know I've been working since 7:30 and I'm going to be really tired then? All of those little choices culminate to our overall experience of our day, and that is our overall experience of our work, right? And the more we make those choices in a suboptimal way, the harder it becomes to find joy, find energy, find the meaning and purpose. And therefore, we haven't got the energy to create the changes and to stick to the disciplines of the going for a walk or going to the yoga practice or whatever it is. So I say, just tackle it one tiny little micro choice at a time. It doesn't have to be running a marathon. It could just be 8 minutes walk each morning for every working day. That might not, to someone who is very ambitious, that might not seem like a huge commitment, but that is the unlocking of the next micro choices in your day that have a huge, huge impact. So I'm super excited about those, micro choices and the profound effect they can have to find a much more sustainable life.
Absolutely. And as you move into your 6th decade, what are you going to be in service of? How can people collaborate with you? How can they get hold of you and contact you?
So I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's the best way to find me. And Kate Franklin and Nkusi Change. I'm there every day, and I love meeting new people and being in a learning community that is the best of LinkedIn. I just love that, sharing learning and exploring where we're all going collectively, and especially in the workplace. So what I'm in service of is better workplaces, right? I think large organizations they have the potential to be the most exciting, stretching, exhilarating centers of excellence where we can all co-create a better future. And I'm all about helping big organizations be that. And that means starting with the individuals in them. And helping everybody to find the work that genuinely fulfills them and energizes them, and helps their organization and their team to be the best it can possibly be.
Lovely. Well, Kate, I really appreciate you sharing your experiences and being so open with us today. I know that many of the audience will be inspired to just reflect on their own leadership style. What did they learn from you in terms of how they might actually take a different approach to leading others and their organizations? So there's lots for them to think about there. And I just want to thank you again for coming on the show today.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Kate.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader. You can access all previous episodes of the show at confessionsofaSuccessfulLeader.com. If you are interested in finding out more about conscious leadership and self-coaching, just type in Andrew Talents into LinkedIn or your favorite browser, and you'll find my contact details and all the content that you need. Until next time, don't forget to stay present, curious, and above all, conscious.